Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Working Mum to Business Mum, helping working mums realise their dream of starting or growing their own business so that they can give up the day job to being more present in their families. I'm Debbie Lucas, and in this episode I'm talking about that dreaded mindset gremlin, imposter syndrome. I'll be digging deeper into what it is, why it's such a mindset block for us, and how to overcome it. Leading on from episode 7, Perfectionism is a form of procrastination, where I discuss some of the reasons why we may lean towards perfectionism, imposter syndrome sits within that mindset block realm. I see and hear so many people speaking of imposter syndrome, but what is it exactly? An article in the Harvard Business Review loosely defines it as doubting your abilities and feeling like a fraud. Verywellmind.com goes on to say that whilst the term is usually applied to intelligence and achievement, it has links to perfectionism and the social context too. The term imposter syndrome was first introduced in the 70s by two psychologists, Susanna Imes and Pauline Rose Clance. They listed 8 common signs of imposter syndrome, namely an inability to realistically assess your competence and skills, attributing your success to external factors, berating your performance, fear that you won't live up to expectations, overachieving, sabotaging your own success, self-doubt, and setting very challenging goals and feeling disappointed when you fall short. I know for myself, I've probably ticked at least 6 of these at various times in my career, but some of them are creeping back in for me as I embark on growing my own business. How many of these resonate with you? More importantly, if you have overcome them, please let us know in my Facebook group, Working Mum to Business Mum. Verywellmind.com goes on to identify 5 types of imposter syndrome. The superhero, who overworks themselves to make up for how inadequate they feel. The natural genius, who sets exceedingly high goals and feels crushed when they don't meet them. The expert, who is never satisfied with their level of understanding and always trying to learn more. The perfectionist, who is never completely happy with their work and is fixated on flaws instead of strengths, or the soloist, who prefers to work alone and who won't ask for help for fear of appearing weak or incompetent. Whilst I see myself in elements of all of these, I'm probably somewhere between the perfectionist and soloist. I always feel like I could have done better, despite praise or feedback to the contrary, and very rarely like to ask for help. The latter, however, is probably more tied to other limiting beliefs rather than worrying about appearing weak or incompetent. So why is this issue such a big mindset block for us? Quite fitting for me, and probably most of you as my listeners, when the concept of imposter syndrome was first introduced, it was in the context of high-achieving women. I'm not going to get into the whole patriarchal debate here, but I do think for women in business in particular, we are still suffering the aftershocks of a male-dominated business world, constantly feeling like we need to prove ourselves and justify our ideas and ambitions. I'd like to think that we've come a very far away from where we were even 10 years ago, but depending on your type of business, this may still be a real issue for you. Whilst we're thankfully moving away from the stereotypes of maternal expectations, for many of us, there may still be an element of feeling like we need to be everything for our families, at least internally anyway. That maternal instinct to want to be there for your children never really goes away. So deciding to take that step into running your own business can sometimes feel incongruent with our instincts. And this is why having clarity on your motivation, your reason, your why is so important. As I've discussed many times over by now, my why is to have more time freedom so that I can be there for my family, as well as practice guilt-free self-care to ensure that they get the best of me. So the two are not mutually exclusive. For me at least anyway. So, now we know what imposter syndrome is and why it's such a stumbling block for us. But how do we overcome it? There are many ways to do this, but I'll share some of what has worked for me, both in the past and currently, as I still struggle with doubts and feeling like a very small fish in a very big pond. Firstly, I have done a lot of work to get rid of my limiting beliefs. This takes a lot of soul searching, but with my coach, I have been able to identify the real core of what makes me feel like I'm not good enough. You see, our limiting beliefs often stem from some deep-held concept of ourselves, and until we are able to identify and be aware of it, any work on shifting your limiting beliefs will be at a surface level. Another real mindset shift that I'm still working on as I speak is to trust in myself and to own who I am. For a long time, I was pretty starstruck by others in the same field as me, by their success, the way they manage and come across on social media, gosh, even their looks. But as I've been learning more about myself over the last few months, I've come to trust in who I am, what I represent, and what I have to offer. I know that by being authentic and being myself, I will attract my ideal client. Mums exactly like me that want to start or grow their business so that they can give up the day job to be more present in their families. Getting rid of doubts or worry is another really helpful way that I've helped to minimize my imposter syndrome. If I have any niggling doubts or worries that start to creep in, rather than trying to ignore them or dismiss them, I have found that by spending a bit of time leaning into that feeling and analysing what is causing it, I can either get rid of it completely, or a lot of times realise that the doubts or worries were actually unfounded. But when something is there, even just by being aware of what that core feeling is, and often it's linked to the same core limiting belief, I feel less doubt and worry already, but can then spend more time working on that and therefore minimise that overall sense of imposter syndrome. Lastly, a big and very uncomfortable lesson for me is to accept feedback and praise for what it is. More often than not, I will dismiss feedback or praise with a wave of a hand and a comment like, "It was no trouble," or "It was actually really easy." Someone recently made a very helpful statement which stuck with me. Just because it's easy for you doesn't mean it's easy for others. This has really helped me to own my knowledge, skills, expertise, and be more confident in what I have to offer. Ruth Soukup summarizes the issue of imposter syndrome and overcoming it so eloquently. You don't have to be an expert. No one is expecting you to be an expert. All you need to do is show up and be you. Before I finish up, a reminder of my first book club episode, which will be episode 15, airing on the 2nd of March 2022. For this one, we are reading Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy, and you can contribute to the discussion by sharing your insights and biggest takeaways in my Facebook group, Working Mum to Business Mum. As always, you can find me on all the usual social media channels and in my Facebook group, Working Mum to Business Mum, and of course on my website, Coaching with Debbie, where you'll find a link to sign up to my weekly newsletter so that you can get any resources I mention in my episodes directly to your inbox. You'll also find a whole host of other helpful hints, tips and information which I'm constantly updating, and I'll add all the links for that in the show notes. Which signs of imposter syndrome do you recognize in yourself? Which type of imposter syndrome do you identify with most? And more importantly, come over to my Facebook group where we will be sharing loads of ways in which our fellow mums are overcoming it on a daily basis. Every 10th episode will be a guest interview episode, and for episode 10, I'm so excited to introduce my very first guest, Di Hill of Di Hill Empowerment Coaching. Di coaches midlife women through an empowerment strategy that works so that they can be transformed from feeling stuck, bored, miserable and frustrated that life is passing them by, and show them how to create a happy, magnificent life full of abundance and joy. Di is bringing out her first book in February 2022, Authentic, Aligned and Abundant, your AAA guide to creating your best life, and we'll be discussing more about this book and other helpful hints, tips and insights that Di has to offer. If you like this podcast, it would really help me a lot if you can share it, rate and review it, and if you don't want to miss that next episode, which is released weekly, then hit that subscribe button. Until then, wishing you all the best.